Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome to the Through a Scottish Prism midweek special. As you know, we do these shows to look out with the borders of Scotland, or things beyond it, because there's a big world out there, and sooner or later, hopefully we'll be joining it. And we have to look at what's happening out there and what kind of world we're getting into. At the moment, we do everything under British foreign policy. That's why we're all supporting Ukraine, we're supporting Israel, and we're opposing countries that have never done any harm to Scotland, but that's where we are. So it's only right that we look out and try and get two sides to every story. And we've tried that in independence matters, and we've tried it in Ukraine with multipolarity. And today, the biggest talking point, of course, at the moment is the horrific war going on in Gaza and Palestine. I condemn violence on both sides, as I always do, just as I condemn all wars and have been for years. But the title of this show is "One Man's Terrorist is Another Man's Freedom Fighter." And you all have heard that phrase. We're going to talk about it today. And at the end of it, you make up your mind. We're not going to tell you, but you make up your mind if you think it's terrorism or freedom fighters. That's your decision. We're just going to give you some facts. And to help me do that, I've got Lloyd Quinnan, of course, with me, my midweek guru. Lloyd, how are you?
I'm very well, but deeply saddened by the events of the past 48 hours.
It's horrific. And over there in the Emerald Isle, our good friend Finbar Markey.
Hello, Scotland and beyond. Well, guys, nice to see you again.
And you, Finbar, always a pleasure. I say, never a chore.
Yeah, ditto to you guys too.
It's as we've alluded to, there's been this horrific upsurge of violence in the Middle East. It's not the first time. It's not going to be the last time. Operation Al-Aqsa flood. If I could start with you, Finbar, what is I think caught everyone unawares, certainly, is how the Palestinians were able to mount an operation. It's a huge operation, one of the biggest in God knows how many years. And the military intelligence of neither Israel or their big buddy America were able to know anything about it and get caught literally with their pants down. Quite amazing, was it not?
It is amazing. There are a number of different theories about what happened there. Some people are saying that this was a ploy by the existing radical Israeli government to actually entice this conflict so that they could bring about what some might call a final solution to their Palestinian problem. And when I say a final solution, I actually mean a final solution. That's the language that's been used, and I think we'll touch upon that later on. It was only a few thousand Hamas soldiers, from what I can ascertain, carried out this operation. It may be a case that because it was organized so well, because it came as allegedly as such a surprise to the Israelis, that it did take them off guard, and that it was, in terms of what it wanted to achieve over that 24 to 48 hour period, that it does seem to have achieved its goal of highlighting this issue. I'll give you an example. The day before, so last Friday, the day before this operation, there were several villages, Palestinian villages in Gaza and around Gaza and greater Palestine, that were attacked by masses of what's been called Israeli settlers. They're armed militants who've been brought over to Israel to steal the homes and the lands of the Palestinian people. People were murdered last Friday. Innocent villagers. Villages were burnt out. Nobody said a word about it. This is every day we have these tragedies being carried out against the Palestinian people, and nobody is saying a word about it. Now, there has been a theory since the foundation of Hamas that Hamas is an offshoot or a creation of Israeli intelligence services to defeat the PLO, for example, which was a non-religious Palestinian independence movement, and Fatah, to try to defeat them. That's why Hamas was created in the first place. It's really hard to tell. This action suggests that Hamas is not a creation of the Israeli security forces and that it has done significant damage to Israel. Again, it's only a few thousand troops. The Israeli response over the last 48 hours is horrific. And I think that they were waiting for this opportunity. I will later on in the show, when we get down to it, I will talk about a guy called Itamar Ben-Gvir and his political party, the Jewish Power Party, that seems to be dominating the direction that things are going in. And to my mind, Ben-Gvir in particular, he is a Jewish Hitler. He regularly calls out for the wiping out of the Palestinian people. So the action in Hamas, it came as a surprise. Maybe it was a holy day. It was a festive day in Israel. Maybe that's why it succeeded. It's hard to tell exactly, and we will never know exactly what happened on Saturday morning in terms of whether the Israeli forces intelligence was involved or not. But by God, Israelis got a kick in their arse and a wake-up call in terms of what they're doing to the Palestinian people. And I know Palestine is suffering terribly at the moment, but on the other hand, Palestine is on everybody's lips, and the majority of people are talking about the injustice, the historical and ongoing injustice against the Palestinian people. So from that point of view, if nothing else, the Hamas operation over the weekend has put Palestine and the Palestinian people on everyone around the world's lips.
Lloyd, as Finbar was saying there, just 24 hours before the attack, settlers were being killed, Palestinian settlers, and not a word. Now, we've seen it in the Ukraine-Russian conflict, but the media put out a narrative that does not bear any resemblance to the truth. But for 56 years, we've been given the old black hats, white hats thing in the Middle East, and it's always the terrorists who attack Israel, and Israel has a right to defend itself. But apparently, those that are occupied in Ukraine have a right to fight back. But those who are occupied in Palestine are not allowed to fight back. They're just dirty terrorists.
Yeah, that would appear to be the dominant narrative. For me, this event just brings absolutely center stage again the necessity for Israel's influence to be trimmed back. Its power to influence the European countries, members of the Security Council of the United Nations, and indeed the General Assembly of the United Nations, is not helping Israel. It's not helping the Palestinians. This situation requires to be solved, and the only way it can be solved is by people talking to each other. The Israelis refuse to talk. There are people who say that Hamas refused to talk, but Hamas over the years have tried to talk to the Israelis. I mean, in 2007, much against the narrative of the West, Hamas won the election in both the West Bank and in Gaza, at which point the Palestinian Authority, using its police force, moved against Hamas and removed them from the West Bank, thereby creating the situation where Hamas was an effective government in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority retained its power in the West Bank, thereby splitting the Palestinian movement. That has caused the deaths of many. But as Finbar said, there has been a ramping up of Israel's annexation and thieving of land, in fact, is the only way to describe it. There have been a large number of settlers have come in particularly from the Ukraine and from other parts of Eastern Europe, but primarily from the United States, who retain their dual citizenship, but then operate in a way like militias. They've been driving people out of their homes over this past few months in very, very large numbers. I think one of the other things that people have to understand about this situation is the Palestinians have been carrying out peaceful demonstrations along the border at the Eretz crossing and at other crossings, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, for years now. And every time that they do, they end up being fired upon, initially with tear gas and rubber-coated bullets, and then it becomes real ammunition. And a huge number of people have been killed and a huge number of people have been injured. But the response was bound to come. And those of us who live in these British Isles should recognise this from our not too distant past. If you crush down a people, as was done by the anti-democratic structures in the north of Ireland, then there will eventually be a reaction. in 1969, we saw a reaction, not on the same scale as the attack by Hamas at the weekend, but people eventually saying enough is enough and fighting back. This is what has happened. These people are fighting back. I find it astonishing. It's 21 years now since I was in Jenin. On the morning that the siege of Jenin was lifted, myself and another Scot called Mick Mooney, we were with the International Solidarity Movement. We went into Jenin and we saw the massive, massive destruction that was carried out by the Israeli Defense Forces. The flattening of a whole refugee camp. They'd spent a week using bulldozers to knock it down and then to literally flatten it. It was as flat as a football field. And sitting amongst the rubble, I saw a man sitting on what had previously been his house with a child's shoe. And it turned out that this man knew that his child was under the building. The Israelis had not allowed them to remove the dead bodies before they crushed the buildings. Now, if you do things like that to any people anywhere on the planet, for the length of time that this has been going on, then the reaction will be violent, because violence has been used against them. And so long as the rest of the world takes outrage at a single event like what happened over the past 48 hours and focuses on that rather than focusing on why did that happen, then we're not moving forward. And it is the responsibility of Western countries, and I wish our country was free. I wish our country was independent, had a place in the United Nations, and we could stand up and say, no, now is the time to talk. Because in the end, unless everybody dies, you're going to have to talk. It's a terrible situation, Roddy.
It is, it's horrible. And the other thing is, it's always, as I say, that the good guys and bad guys. Techie, could you put up the video, please, of the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, who was being interviewed by the BBC and was being asked to apologise or condemn the action of the Hamas combatants. Please put that up.
Israel have committed war crimes right live on your own cameras. Do you start by asking them to condemn themselves? Have you? You don't. You don't. No, I'll answer that question. You don't. You know why I refuse to answer this question? Because I refuse the premise of it. Because at the very heart of it is misrepresentation of the whole thing. Because it's the Palestinians that are always expected to condemn themselves. I mean, come on, this is a political conflict. We have been denied our rights for a long time. You bring us here whenever there are Israelis who are killed. Did you bring me here when many Palestinians in the West Bank, more than 200 over the last few months? Do you invite me when there is such Israeli provocations in Jerusalem and elsewhere? Because what Israelis have seen, which we started by saying tragic, the last 48 hours, the Palestinians see every day for the last 50 years. You know the situation in Gaza, you've just described it. This is the biggest open-air presence. Those people, 2 million, have been taken hostage by Israel for the last 16 years.
I mean, it's a very powerful interview, and I think the BBC interviewer, Finbar, got more than he bargained for. And just before I go on to ask you, I just want to say this morning, just before we started recording, there are now 140 dead Palestinian children, 105 women, all civilians. And those people who are shouting about the terrorists are not going on the BBC, and no Israeli ambassador has been asked to go to the BBC to condemn this more killings of Palestinian. The ambassador was absolutely right with what he was saying, wasn't he?
I think, first of all, that man, my understanding is that he personally had 6 members of his family killed over the last 24 to 48 hours by the bombardment. So even on a personal level, to ask him, I'm surprised he could keep his cool. I suppose that's why he is a diplomat. Listen, it's always the same. As an example, there's attempts now to stoke as much outrage in our minds as possible against the Palestinian people and against Hamas, to the extent that there's videos being shared now which are from Libya, from Western-backed Islamic terrorists in Libya, from Western-backed Islamic terrorists in Syria, being shared around the internet, horrific atrocities. It's been claimed to be Hamas over the last few days. We are hearing about the rape of and murder and massacre of civilians, videos being put up. But when I watch the videos, I don't see any rape and I don't see any murders. But most people won't watch the video. They'll bypass it and say, oh, how terrible. And so we are having a stage set in our mind about atrocities that are not happening. The majority of the attacks by Hamas were on militarized settlements. Now, remember, if an adult, male or female, is living in a settlement, Israeli or dual citizenship Israeli, is living in what was a Palestinian home, they've got guns. They're armed to the hilt because they're going out every night hunting down Palestinians and putting them out of their homes with their weapons. But when they are challenged, we're being told that that woman was an innocent woman that was raped. And when there was no rape, she may have been attacked when she attacked herself using her IDF weapons. So gender is being used. This trope of rape and sex crimes, mass sex crimes, it comes out every time, in whether it was Libya, whether it was Iraq, anywhere. This is something that is used, lies about sex crimes on a massive scale to get our sympathy and to evoke outrage in our hearts and in our minds. There's nothing more outrageous than what's being done to the Palestinian people now and for the last nigh on 70 years, essentially. So be careful what you're watching. I'll give an example. There was videos going around of children in cages, and it was claiming that Hamas put those videos out. It turns out that those videos were Palestinian children that were being put in cages by Israelis, not the opposite way around. And yet we're being told that it's the other way around. We have to be very careful, because what Israel is about to do and what the Zionists are about to do is massacre and destroy an entire population and race of people, and they need to justify that by fomenting outrage against those people in our hearts. But I've done assessments of so many of the videos out there. Again, watching videos, and the text in the video will tell us before we watch it that this girl was forced to watch X being shot, and yet when I watch the video, I see no shooting. In fact, I've seen several videos out there, one from an Israeli station, Channel 12, in which there's an Israeli woman who she herself and her kids were taken hostage on Saturday by Hamas. They went into her home, they took her hostage, and she said they were really respectful to her. One of them even asked her, could they take a banana that was sitting on a table because they were hungry? And they gave her a seat, and they said to her, we are Muslims, we're not inhumane, we're not going to hurt you. And I've seen multiple videos of when people were being captured and they were in fear of their lives because the Israelis have been told by their government, these people will rape you, they'll cut you up into bits. And so the fear that they had, and yet when Hamas captured them live on video, you could see it, they were actually trying to calm the people down and then, we're not going to hurt you. We're humanitarian in our outlook here. This is about the Israeli government. So there's the serious propagandistic attempts to turn us against the Palestinian people to justify what's happening and what's about to happen. And we need to be very careful about that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've read articles there. I remember just before we started bombing Libya, it was said that Gaddafi was giving his soldiers Viagra. They said the exact same about the Russian soldiers going into Ukraine. It's one of their favourite tropes, and sadly, an awful lot of people grab it. But Lloyd, as I said earlier, the propaganda, and it's been going on for, Israel are the good guys, and could be Israel, they can't be talked about. If you do, you're an anti-Semite. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, will come on to him shortly, found to his cost for supporting Palestine. You're a Holocaust tonight, all those nonsense things. But Techie, can you put up the picture what the British Prime Minister and every UK government building is doing at present? But not in my name, I tell you. This is above number 10, Lloyd. I believe that the good offices of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom should not be taking sides and should be looking for a peaceful settlement and an end to an occupation, not promoting one side or the other.
Well, that would be if there was an adult in the room, Roddy. But there is no adult in the room. We have a British Prime Minister ruling our country, he's a bit like one of those dolls you get in the budgie cage. The budgie knocks it over, it gets back up. It gets knocked over, it gets back up. Because he is a man stuck in the winds of history. He's already tied himself to the Modi regime in India, which is a violently anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim organization or government. And I think they're tied into a place. his own Conservative Party receives millions of pounds of donations from pro-Israeli organisations and pro-Israeli conservatives living here in the UK. But I think one thing that helps to defeat the propaganda is if you actually analyse what Israel is. Now, when I went there to the occupied Palestine, I was shocked by the number of armed people I saw on the street, not on checkpoints, not, searching people, just wandering about with an automatic rifle over their shoulder. It's an entirely militarized society. From 16 to 60, you are either in, about to go in, have just come out and are on the reserve list of the IDF. That's everybody, absolutely everybody. And for anybody who's ever had any form of military training or understands the nature of military training is to create a single mindset. And it's the single mindset that creates discipline in an army. Now, when you have a country that is effectively an army, that has had that psychological training to go to war, they carry with them that militaristic attitude on a day-to-day basis. So it's no surprise to me when I hear both government ministers and ordinary peoples in the streets of the occupied towns, Israelis saying, kill them all. This is the chance now for the final solution. That is the product of a militaristic society. Of every country in the world, we're meant to believe that the most brainwashed and the most militaristic country in the world is North Korea. It's not. It's Israel. I've been there. I have seen it. I've seen them both in action against the Palestinian civilian population, and I've seen them in action on at the checkpoints, where everything that is done by the Israelis is to crush the spirit of the Palestinians. I stood at a bus stop on Friday, and somebody got irate at the fact that they didn't get on a bus because there were so many people in front of them in the queue. I stood at the Kalandia checkpoint outside Ramallah for 5.5 hours, along with workers waiting to be allowed into Israel. And it was all part of the psychology of crushing the morale of the people. It's a day-on-day basis attitude that the Israelis have. Their whole attitude of yesterday was, just leave, you must go. And underlying all of this will be Netanyahu's attempt to create such horror in Gaza that it will force the Egyptians to open the border and people will stream out, and then the Israelis will not let them go back. That's the way these things always happen. If you leave, you can't go back. The Israelis won't let you. They control the only airport in the country. There's one airport alone. I myself can no longer use that airport thanks to a stamp in my passport from 2002. But we have to understand the life for a Palestinian on a day-to-day basis is one where you are treated with utter and complete contempt by every structure that you have to deal with. That is why we're in the situation we're in now. And the greatest horror of all is not the killings that happened at the weekend and will continue to be the killings that will continue. It's the fact that there is a solution to this. There is an answer. If the world is prepared to take responsibility, knock heads together. The Norwegians tried it some decades ago, and all that's happened there is politics has changed in Norway, and Norway is no longer the broker. The world needs a country that's going to broker peace in this situation, in the situation in Somalia, and other situations that will arise. I'm glad that Ireland took the choice yesterday to reject the European Union's imposition of sanctions on Palestine. But they're trapped as part of the European Union. They cannot be the honest broker when it comes to peace. But a country like our own, Roddy, in the European free trade area, that would allow us the ability to actually be that place of peace, bring people here, knock heads together, and let's get this sorted out once and for all, or it will continue for another 75 years.
Well, see, that's the tragedy. And here's the thing, Finbar, I'm just going to pop up any second now a paper clip, but I want you to imagine a different scenario. If the Russians surrounded Kiev with tanks, switched off the electricity, stopped food getting in, only allowed water 4 hours a day, and just then they said, we're going to wipe out everyone in there. Can you imagine the outrage? Techie, put up the Jewish Chronicle for me. Or the Jewish Times of Israel, rather. When genocide is permissible, and yet the world is silent about things like that. Can you imagine if a Russian paper said that, Finbar?
I think we live in such a crazy world where we arm and finance actual self-declared Nazis in Ukraine. We have a government that behaves like the worst of the Nazis in the 1930s against the Palestinian people in Israel. They threaten genocide. I have seen some Western politicians, US politicians and Israeli politicians talking about using nuclear devices against Gaza over the last few days. It's absolutely insane. There have been political solutions presented for this for the last, as I say, from Norway, and even prior to that. The entire international world practically accepts that the Israeli expansionism is illegal. Expansionism and the theft of Palestinian land is illegal, and they're constantly breaking international law, and we stand by and do nothing. And every so often there's a conflation in the area. There's massive killing, maybe on both sides, mainly against Palestinians. We're outraged for a day or two, and then we allow things to go back to where they were. But you mentioned earlier, Roddy, and I think you did as well, Lloyd, about the influence that Israel has in politics in Europe and the United States. Nearly every senior US politician is bought off and paid off by the Israeli government, as Israel is owned by the United States. The same in the UK, particularly with the Conservative Party, but also a lot of senior members in the Labour Party in Britain are bought off. And I'm sure if you have a look at the SNP, it's in there too. So these are infiltrations by a foreign government, by Israel. When we see what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, that in itself was an act of war. Jeremy Corbyn was the obvious future leader of Britain, and they had him deposed through lies, through bribery, through blackmail, every way they could. And to my mind, that was actually an act of war that was committed against Britain by Israel. Nobody's saying a video actually came out. A secret video was taken of a guy from the Israeli embassy bribing and organizing the payments to senior members of media in the UK and politicians. Not a word about it. Where do you go from here?
Well, that's what we do shows like this, and we give people the other side of the argument, the debate, and let them know, and then hopefully you hope there's an upsurge of pressure, against all this. But Lloyd, it is getting to the stage now where things are starting to happen. I noticed just before we started recording, that the General Secretary of the Arab League flew to Moscow, and he's now in Moscow in conversations with Lavrov. Teki, can you put the picture of the Saudi Arabian prince? Saudi have refused all negotiations with Israel while it's going because of all their behaviour. Now, the Americans had great influence over Saudi, and they had brokered this for Saudi to recognise Israel. That's now gone. There is a change. We've had multipolarity talks, us three together, but this is sort of the multipolarity thing coming together in a crisis.
Well, very much so, Roddy. I think also the statement from the Chinese leader Xi Jinping was in typical Confucian diplomatic language, was incredibly strong, very strong, and an indicator of the future. I do not think America and Israel are going to get an easy time in the Security Council from China in the future. And I think also there was an implicit commitment by China to provide support for what will be a massive, massive rebuilding required in Gaza. There is one thing we'd like to say about the West's misinterpretation of the Palestinian people. Around about 1 in 5 Palestinians is Christian, and that's true in Gaza as well as it is in the rest of the country. Palestinian is not synonymous with Islam. The majority religion is Islam, but there are other religions, and none indeed. And that this is about the Palestinians are a people without culture and a language. And like all truly civilized people, they have a multiplicity of religions and philosophies within their community. They are not all, as described by the West, Muslim fundamentalists, whatever that means. You know, I've never met a Catholic. Well, I have met a Catholic fundamentalist, but it's a different thing. We have to recognize these are people. You cannot use the cover of someone's religion on either side, Jewish or Muslim or Christian or Druze, for instance. There are Druze Palestinians as well. You know, these are people. And the direct conflict is between a people who have decided that land belongs to them and that they will fight tooth and nail to keep it because of a book written some many thousands of years ago. There's an absurdity to that. But at the same time, we have to recognize this is not about religion. This is not a religious war. This is a war between people who have been colonized and the colonizers. It's between those that have been stolen from by those who did the stealing. That's simply it. If it was a situation of someone came to your door and said, like, you can no longer live here, and then you are moved out and the family moves in. This has been happening on a day and daily basis, weekly basis, month to month basis for years now. But it ramped up immediately that Netanyahu became the leader of Israel. And he is leading his people into graver and graver danger. The more pressure you put on people, the greater the response will be. The lashing out will be worse than it has ever been before. And there is no solution to this by killing people. There just isn't.
In fact, on your point about Christian, again, another thing I'm caught up on, the third oldest Christian church in the entire world was destroyed by Israeli bombs last night. The third oldest, and you know, America, who professes to be so Christian and so God bless America stuff, are they saying anything? Not a word, not a peep.
There's also the point, sorry for jumping in, guys, there's also the point that the Orthodox Jews in Israel are completely against the way the Zionist Israeli government are treating the Palestinians. And they have been oppressed themselves over the last number of years because of their public anger towards the way the Palestinian people have been treated. So this would be the Jewish community that were there prior to 1948, before this influx of Europeans claiming to be Jews who have a right to land in Israel. So it's important to remember that not even all the Jewish people who are in Israel are supportive of what's going on. And there is also a movement in Israel, particularly amongst young people who are pacifists, who don't want to join the Israeli army, who don't want to be involved in the oppression and the massacre of the Palestinian people as well. So this idea that when we say Israel, we mean that there's a monolithic type of Israel that just has one set of beliefs, which is anti-Palestinian, that's not even correct. And
nor is it the only democracy. The other one they love to use, it's the only democracy in the whole Middle East. Not very
democratic. You know something? They take fig leaves like gay rights. And they say, oh, but look at the Muslims, they're against the gays, whereas, you know, Israel's so pro-gay rights. But that's a fig leaf to hide their brutality and their cruelty towards their fellow human beings, to my mind. It's almost like in Ukraine, you have this Kirillo fellow, this trans spokesperson for the Nazi elements of the Ukrainian army. And again, he is just a fig leaf to hide the reality that lies beneath it. Just like Zelensky's Jewishness is a fig leaf to hide the far-right elements in Ukraine, you know. But just on one final point that Lloyd made about people being moved in and out of houses. They're not moved in and out of houses. They're brutally forced from their homes. Their settlers then stand outside their homes and belittle and make fun of them and sneer at families as the families have been forced out of their homes, telling them, we're going to take your home and there's nothing that you can do about it. To my mind, anyone who does that is the scum of the earth. And I don't usually use language like that. But if you come from America or Australia or a European country invited by Israel, and you go over probably the dregs of some other country, and you go over to Israel knowing that you're going to be putting a family out on the street and you're going to be brutalizing a community so that you can take a home, that you already had a home in the country you're already in, because you'll be like a king here. You'll be able to stand on people's heads. And that's why a lot of people go to Israel, because they know they won't be as low as they are in the country they're in at the moment. They'll go to Israel where they'll be higher up, beggars on horseback. To my mind, that's the worst form of humanity.
Lloyd, I always try to look for things that you can connect the dots. Netanyahu is having terrible internal problems in Israel, particularly with trying to his reform of the law. A nice war against defenceless people is a good way of deflecting people's eyes away from what the problems he's having. Or am I too cynical?
No, you're absolutely right, Roddy. That has been the modus operandi of the Knesset and of many, many leaders of Israel over the years. When someone gets in trouble, there were a couple who used the opposite, which was to try and create peace, but they were crushed. But 9 times out of 10, there will be, for instance, we had the invasion of Lebanon in the 80s, when the prime minister at the time was under pressure. And it may well be the case that that's what's happened here. It may well be the case, because you can never take anything that any elected Israeli politician or government politician says at face value. I became interested in this a long time ago. I've read a lot about what goes on, and I keep abreast of what's going on because I made friends when I was in occupied Palestine, and I like to know what life is like for them. Now, every couple of years, some ex-general or some ex-Mossad agent pops up to tell us about some secret operation that was carried out by the Israelis, where their evil mortal enemies were dispatched on the streets of some foreign country. But they didn't talk about it at the time, but they like to tell you about it a little bit later because it keeps up the fear. The fact of the matter is, the Israelis provided guns to the loyalist paramilitaries in Northern Ireland. The Israelis attempted to get the Kurds to kill people for them in Belgium. These are documented facts now. Israel, because it's a colonized settler country built on theft, it will do anything to preserve itself, and it believes that it has the right to do whatever it requires to preserve its own status. Now, nothing, absolutely nothing, would surprise me about Benjamin Netanyahu and his current cabinet. This could well be something that they allowed to happen, because all the information is that they were being told by the Egyptians that something was going to occur, and they chose to ignore it, partly because of something that Finbar said earlier on. The settler militia attacks in the West Bank to attempt to annex other parts of the West Bank. The Israeli Defense Forces' focus has been on the West Bank and not on Gaza. They thought they had Gaza all penned up with security cameras and fences and audio triggers. But the fact is, they took their eye off the ball, and they have suffered as a result of it. But really, what I fear might happen in the next couple of days is that this may well, and if this is coordinated as well as the attack on Saturday and Sunday was, I mean, and it's reminiscent of some of the major attacks carried out by the Tamil Tigers during their war with Sri Lanka, very, very similar in nature. If that is the case, then it's very likely that what's going to happen is Hezbollah will come in, or Islamic Jihad will come in from the Lebanese border, and then that will then force the Israelis to remove troops that they're about to use for their ground offensive in Gaza, will need to be transferred back to the north of the country, at which point the West Bank rises. Now, if the sane, sensible people in politics in this world do not move and move quickly, that is the scenario that could come out. The ground invasion into Gaza by the Israelis, attack from Lebanon into northern Israel, and then the West Bank rises up. And the reason that I fear it is because thousands of people will be killed. Be they armed or not, they will die. And that is my greatest fear.
Indeed, I second that emotion, as they say. Finbar, because Lloyd's right to point out that there's mass deaths coming. Teki, can you put up the Defence Minister of Israel, a man called Gallant? I mean, or I'm sure it's pronounced something else, but Gallant. And if we just see what he says here, which is just quite. I have ordered a complete siege in the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we act accordingly. Now, I think it's fair to say, Finbar, that is not very diplomatic language. It is appalling. And if it came from, as again I go back to North Korea or Moscow or Tehran, the outrage would be off the Richter scale.
It's the language, I'm sure, that the Gelite masters were using when the Nazis that were in control of the Warsaw Ghetto, when the Jews rose up in the 1940s during World War II in the Warsaw Ghetto. It reminds me very much of that. I think the dehumanization of the Palestinian people is reflected once more in that language. He felt like that long before last Saturday, and this is the language that's been used long before last Saturday. Lloyd's concerns about constant massacres, worse killings to come. When I look at kids going back to school over the last month here, teenagers maybe going into first year and second year of school, and the concerns and the worries that they have, will they make new friends, things like that. Oh, I lost my school jumper, mum's going to kill me, something like that. And you look at the concerns that the children in Palestine have and are going to have over the next while in particular. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And when you think that there are people, no matter what, that would use that kind of language about an entire race of people, an entire population, it's just, there's no words to conceptualize or to fully convey how I feel, and I'm sure how you guys feel about that. When you know that allegedly Israel was founded, allegedly because of the way the Jewish people were treated during the Holocaust, and yet they seem to be reflecting their own worst enemies, from the Nazis, in what they're doing. It's unbelievable. Where it's going to go, you were talking about the likelihood of expansion if other parties become involved in this. I think there's only one tiny bit of light at the end of the corridor. But the bottom line is that Israel is another state of the United States. That's the reality of it, okay?
Yeah, that's why the Sixth Fleet has once again been moved into position with the USS Gerald Ford with fighter jets. Against who? Because the Palestinians, Finbar, have no air force, no navy, no defense, no air defenses, no heavy armor, nothing. So why do we need a whole fleet off the coast of Israel?
Because I think they've got to fear something else. But here's my overall point. The United States is becoming very, very stretched in terms of the armaments that it's able to supply to Ukraine. They're talking about Ukraine or Israel now, one or the other. They have potential further conflict in Iraq because stuff's starting to heat up there. We've got Azerbaijan and Armenia. The United States is starting to get stretched in terms of the amount of wars, current wars and future wars, and as well as sending armaments and war machines over to Taiwan as well. They're getting very, very stretched. There may be a sliver of light here that's indicating that America is going to have to pull the plug on some of these wars, that it can't maintain them all. Hopefully it'll pull the plug on what's happening to a degree in Palestine, Israel at the moment. Maybe they'll try to talk some sense into Israel because they can't afford another battlefront to open up, which would be if, as Lloyd was saying, other parties became involved in this. I don't think the United States can sustain it.
I mean, here's the thing, Lloyd. 1 minute the Hamas people are terrorists, and the Americans feel the need to rearm Israel, one of the most, as you said, militarized countries in the world. Well, why would you need to do that if they're just terrorists? Or is it overkill? No pun intended.
I think I saw something very interesting in Al Jazeera last night, and I think we lose sight because we don't see the US newspapers every day, and most of us who want to see news don't really lock into the likes of CNN and Fox News. But the American obsession, and it's an obsession that comes from the state and the Defense Department, from those who have crossed the, from each administration over the last 3 or 4 presidents, their obsession with Iran is deeply, deeply worrying, because what they're trying to do is suggest that Palestinian resistance only happens because Iran tells them to do it. When the Shah of Iran was still in power, there was Palestinian resistance. Before that, when Mossadegh was the president of Iran, there was Palestinian resistance. The Palestinians do not require the support of another country. Their resistance is a natural product of their circumstances, and any attempt by America, and to me it seems like they're flexing their muscle at Iran. I mean, even the coverage in the BBC yesterday, where it's absolutely essential that every time you mention Hezbollah, you have to say funded by Iran. When in reality Hezbollah predates the current Iranian regime by a long, long way. Just wasn't called that at the particular time. But no, the narrative here is frightening, because is this an opportunity? And on the one hand, this is Netanyahu's opportunity to deal the Palestinians a terrible blow. But there are those hawks in the American defense industries and in the Defense Department who may want to use this as a possible provocation to Iran. And that we should all be worried about.
And isn't there a constant attempt to try to define the Palestinian people and paint them as Islamic extremists? And I think, the PLO was a secular organization led by Yasser Arafat, who was poisoned. I think there was when his body was actually exhumed and there was tests on, they found that he was actually poisoned, probably by the Israelis. But the Israelis realized that they had no justification for what they were doing against a secular organization and a people just wanting freedom and liberty. So they had to paint them as something wicked. And they've been trying to align them with Iran, because Iran is seen as an Islamic country, and also to align them with elements like ISIS. And there's a lot of evidence that ISIS and the likes of those ISIS groups were actually funded and armed by the likes of Israel and by the likes of the United States to create chaos in that region. So there's this other attempt, this othering of them, if you want to put it like that, to make them look, the Palestinian people, to make them look like Islamic terrorists and extremists and things like that. But I still maintain the line that the United States, they may not realize it themselves, but they're stretching themselves very finely.
I mean, I think I blame Iran for everything. How dare they have so much oil that America wants, Finbar? It's disgraceful of them. And that is the cynic in me again. But I want to come back to you, Finbar, for this next bit. And that is Craig Murray, a good colleague, an ex-British ambassador and pro-independence man, wrote a good blog this week. And basically what he was saying is the political elite and the media in the UK and in the US, too, I would suggest, or not so much US, but definitely in the UK, are all pro to a man on Israel. But the general public are not so keen on it. Is it similar in Ireland?
I think that the Irish upper echelons of politics in the standard ruling parties of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil over the years have been generally pro-Israeli, but they know that the Irish people and Irish history would be isn't so in favour of the Palestinian cause that they're afraid to publicly utter anything that would be critical of the Palestinian people per se. So we have this dualism, I suppose, that publicly it looks like the Irish political sphere will be pro-Palestinian, but I think in their hearts the likes of Simon Coveney, Leo Varadkar, Micheál Martin are actually pro-Israeli, really. But for instance, the criticism of attempts by the EU today to stop any aid going to Palestine from the EU, the Irish government had no choice but to utter objection to that, because there was serious protest last night outside the Israeli embassy in Ireland. The police were involved. There was arrests made. There was red paint. The guys climbed over the fences, put red paint all over the front of the Israeli embassy. I think the Irish government are afraid that they'll be at their doorsteps next if they don't take or make utterances that reflect what the Irish people think about this. And I do have to say as well that the majority of the Irish people, unfortunately, the only access they have to media is the standard legacy corporate media and the public stations like RTE. And so they are being fed. So I've spoken to people over the last 48 hours who normally would be 100% behind the Palestinian cause. And some of them have been, oh, but look what Hamas did, all the massacres. And so they're only seeing the media that most people are seeing. And so even the Irish dedication to the Palestinian cause, it wobbled a little bit in some circles, I think, over the last few days because of the intensity of the propaganda coming out on the Israeli side.
Lloyd, one thing we should make clear here, the UN has condemned Israel with 200 resolutions that every time the Americans get it vetoed. But people should know, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, the majority, Israel keeps breaking the law every day. Saddam Hussein broke, what was it, 2 resolutions, and his country was bombed back to the Middle Ages and he was executed. 2 different worlds.
Absolutely. But, you know, here in Scotland, the general attitude has been from the majority of ordinary people is they recognise the injustice. They don't know too much detail about it, but they do kind of feel that there should be a solution between the two, respect for both sides, no real condemnation on one side or the other. But the political party I'm a member of has or was subscribed to Resolution 242, the famous resolution carried by Lord Caradon, who was the British ambassador to the United Nations, unbeknownst to the British government. On his last day as the ambassador, he submitted 242 as a resolution, and it was passed, and Britain voted for it, much to the chagrin of whoever was in number 10 on that day. Now, that's always been the position of the SNP, and I hope at this conference at this weekend that the SNP speaks out, because what 242 says is an immediate withdrawal to the 1947 borders and the beginning of talks on a 2-state solution with a possible option of a single state, 2 codes structure, which is a kind of addendum on the bottom of it. I would look forward to the SNP at their conference restating that position, particularly given that our First Minister's mother and father-in-law are currently trapped in Gaza. But it's dangerous that this anti-Semitism or anti-Semitism creation of the Israeli government over it now. It's been an operation. I can't remember the name of it, but it was decided in about 2005 that there was a necessity to break down support for Palestine in Western countries, and the way to do that was to effectively turn any criticism of Israeli politics or of the Israeli state into a statement of being a statement of anti-Semitism. Now, that's rejected by Orthodox Jews. It's rejected by most, certainly by non-religious Jews. But it's actually become the point of fear in the Western media, proved by the reduction of Jeremy Corbyn by our media. And I think that has actually permeated particularly into the middle class in our country, where people are frightened of saying pro-Palestinian things because they may be accused of being anti-Semitic. I have to say, in the past couple of days, knowing that we were doing this, some of these things have gone through my mind. That is the influence that this overall operation to create a circumstance whereby no criticism of Israel is allowed because it will be equated with anti-Semitism. And that, I think, has allowed people off the hook. So everyone can say, oh, yes, I support them, but look at that terrible thing that happened at the weekend, while not recognising the terrible things that happened on Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday and Monday of last week.
Yeah, there's Palestinian people being getting killed in their own home. There's war crimes being committed by Israel. And it's on television and they're showing it. And no one's saying, well, not in our neck of the woods. But the rest of the world are different. Now, where are they? What are you going to say something, Lloyd?
Yeah, it's back to the militarized Israel again. You know, to the Palestinians, most Israelis they see are in a uniform. Yeah, most of them are carrying a gun, because at every crossing point into Israel, that's what you see. You do not see civilians. You see border police, You see the army, you see the army reserves, and wandering the streets, you see the civilianly dressed settler militias. To most young Palestinians, and I say this because I had these conversations when I was there, to most Palestinians, any Israeli between the ages of 16 and 50 is a soldier, male or female. They're a soldier in the eyes of Palestinians, because that's their experience. That is their direct experience. And how, you know, the cozy coffee table people here in Britain or in Ireland as well, Finbar, you say, oh, that was an atrocity one too far. Oh, they've gone too far this time. They have no real understanding that don't respond to the event. It's not the event that's important. The event is a product of a circumstance. It's the circumstance that needs to be addressed. And it needs to be addressed immediately. It should have been addressed, you know, every year since 1947, but it hasn't been. Here's an opportunity. Somebody has to take it. Somebody has to stand up. I was very surprised that Spain stood up, you know, given Spain's history. But someone somewhere, unfortunately, it's not going to be the guy who lives in Pennsylvania Avenue.
No, the guy that lives in Downing Street. But Finbar, could we have up Mary Lou McDonald, if we can? One of the only politician I've seen, certainly in the British Isles, who has come out with what is, you know, the international community faces immediate test of commitment to peace, justice and rule of law, punishing Palestine while Israeli acts with impunity repeats the pressing formula of failure. We need ceasefires, dialogue and the enforcement of international law. And that's what we need, international law, Finbar. And Mary Lou, I'm sure you're quite proud. She's the one politician that seems to be saying what needs to be said.
Yeah. In these circumstances, I'm not sure how much she'd hold that line if she was in government herself. It's easy when you're in opposition and you're in a party that has a history of challenging oppression like that. But the power of the Israeli lobby, in terms of what she could do, if Sinn Féin are expected to be in the next government in Ireland, probably in a coalition, what she as a government could do into the future if she became the Irish leader, the Irish Taoiseach, I think would be limited by this Israeli lobby, which has inveigled itself into every cabinet and every government in Europe and in the United States. So I appreciate her words. It's not only Mary Lou McDonald, but all of the senior members of Sinn Féin have made far more powerful statements than Mary Lou McDonald over the last few days. I just wonder how that would hold if they were in government sitting at a cabinet table. That's where the problematic is, you know. Sinn Féin and the Irish people have a history of supporting Palestine, even of supporting Colonel Gaddafi at one time in Libya when he was a revolutionary, especially before he got into government as well. We'll see how that holds in the long run. My overall idea of where this is going and how the international community is going to respond to it is that they're all going to come down on the side of Israel. Ultimately, Israel's operation may be over in the next 7 days. For our international politicians, well, not international, in Europe and in the United States, even though there's going to be severe massacres of the Palestinian people, the imagery that's coming out already of entire areas being flattened by Israeli artillery fire, that's going to be ignored, and they're still going to focus on last Saturday. That's where the focus is going to be ultimately. It's where it's going to stay. I just wonder this time next year if there's going to be a collective Palestinian people anymore.
Yeah, it is a heck of a worry, Lloyd. Do you see any hope? I mean, I listened to Donald Trump, and he was talking about Ukraine. He said, first day if I'm re-elected, I will stop the Ukraine war. I believe that any United States president could not only end the war in Ukraine in one day, it could also end this with 2 phone calls, one to Kiev and one to Jerusalem, dare I say now. One to Jerusalem and saying, sober boys, we're not supporting you anymore. Make peace. 2 calls, that's all it takes, and the world is a better place.
The money's cut off.
That, I mean, Roddy, yeah, that is, in a lot of ways, is immediately the solution. The biggest problem we have, though, is that American politics is so tied up with how much money can you draw together to fight your campaign, that the influence of the Jewish National Committee and such like organizations is absolutely massive. But is that lobby as strong as the poor working people of America who can't put food on the table at the moment? If they were really genuinely aware of how much money America subsidizes Israel too, that could be going for medical aid, it could be going for healthcare, it could be going for education. But who's going to fight that? Who's going to fight on that ticket? Bernie Sanders tried to say some things about it, but he's gone very, very silent on it. No one else is going to say anything. It has to come from Europe. It has to come from somewhere in Europe, because America's not going to turn the tap off. Not at this period when there's an election, probably next year or the year after. We're already into the electoral cycle in the United States. The primaries have started. No one's going to make a false step on this one. And in some ways, this is what Israel as a state has always done. It waits for, we talk about it in terms of Scotland and Britain, but the Israelis are very clever at carrying out particular actions when you're in the stage of the primaries, because they know very well they're not going to get heavily slapped on the wrist for whatever they're doing, because that will influence the outcome of a potential presidential race. You have to have hope. You have to have hope. I mean, in some ways, after reading the statement from the Chinese leader, I'm thinking to myself, is that where the hope could come from? But then again, as Finbar says, the Chinese don't have the ability to turn off the money. And the only way to stop Israel dead in its tracks is turn off the money. But also, for us that are unfortunate to have to carry a British passport, it's time that our government stop providing aviation fuel from the RAF base at Akrotiri in Cyprus to the Israeli Defence Forces on a regular basis.
Oh, we didn't know that. But here's the thing. The great actor or comedian George Carlin, Finbar, said that American politicians should wear jackets like NASCAR drivers with who's sponsoring them. And we know that they're the most, this will have to be to you, Lloyd, the most bought and sold politicians in the world now. The wealth of, and maybe I'm being simplistic again, but Saudi Arabia, Iran, Kuwait, just to name but three of the largest oil producers in the world, surely they could go and buy these people, because Americans are easy bought and easy bribed and easy if you give the money for the propaganda. Why don't the Arabs just club together and do that?
I think unfortunately the three countries you just named are currently under sanctions and can't actually use the American banking system, so they've shut off that opportunity. I'm sure I certainly can't answer this question as wittily as Finbar did, and I hope he's back soon. But the mystery of all of this over the past 70 years, Roddy, really is the inability of the Arab countries to stand solid and stand together. Because it should be obvious that the Palestinians, irrespective of their religion, are Arabs. So it's the Arab countries we should be looking at. And the Arab country, Iran is not an Arab country. It's an Islam. They're Persians. It's different. Turkey's a Muslim country, but they're not Arabs. The Arabs are in Lebanon, Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Morocco. Now, combined, those are countries that have an element of power in the world. But if they stood honestly on the position that is, because they are primarily, the main religion is Islam, though the culture is Arab, the language is Arab. Arabs are known for their hospitality. Arabs are known for their welcoming attitude. What those countries have to do is get together with themselves and say, we will create or help to create a solution. But in some ways, those countries have been weakened so badly by the actions of the West over the past, certainly 3 decades, that they don't have the power to do that anymore. It's no coincidence that the countries that opposed Israel in the strongest possible sense, who also had an element of military power, never as an equal to Israel, namely Egypt and Syria, are two countries which are, Syria is now effectively ruined. and Egypt is a client state of the United States. So I don't see where it can come in the Arab world. And also, I think anyone who puts the eggs in the basket of Saudi Arabia, hoping that, you know, they will suddenly leap to the Palestinian cause, I think is making a mistake. I think what's coming out of Saudi Arabia at the moment is an element of contrition, partly to do with the fact that the Crown Prince is already practically anathema to the whole of the international political world. I think you should ask Finbar that question now that I've rambled on.
Well, it was a good bit of ad lib. It was that good I forgot what I asked.
Like, guys, I'm having some technical problems. I apologize for disappearing. I think Mossad may not be too happy with the program.
Yeah. We've actually overshot the runway, and we've come to the end of this. It's been fabulous, and I've got a whole load of questions that I still haven't even got around to. This is not going to go away. We'll no doubt come back to it. I just want to reiterate again that we're totally opposed to death and wars. This is not about sides, but let me ask you the final question. We have to go very quickly. The title we gave to this show is "One Man's Terrorist is Another Man's Freedom Fighter." Is that a fair shout in Palestine, Finbar?
I think it is. When you just see what's been done to those people, how could you not join in? As a young man, for instance, how could you not join a militant organization to try to stop the oppression of your mother, of your sisters, of the children in your community? How could you not join some militant organization to put up a fight? It would be impossible for myself, and I think any right-minded person, to not join something, not to try to resist. I think it would be impossible for most people. So I would agree with that. Being an Irishman as well, I fully understand that concept too. Can I just make the point, because I got cut off earlier on, in terms of Mary Lou McDonald, Sinn Féin, political parties like that standing up initially now for the Palestinian people. It's important to remember that when they go into government, they have to work with the United States, especially a country like Ireland, which is so dependent economically on the United States for its private companies that operate in Ireland. The amount of pressure that can be put on political parties, even if they are pro-Palestinian, when they get into government, because it'll be put up to them. You either have a good economy or you support the Palestinian people, which is...
Well, Finbar, I would suggest that the Irish lobby in the United States is a bit stronger than even the Israelis. I don't think the Israelis could be bigger than the Irish, but that's...
I actually think you'd be surprised to find out that when it comes to the financial clout...
I'd be disappointed to hear, the finances, yes, of course. That's it. What about you, Lloyd? Same question to you.
It's obvious to me. I saw it when I was there, and I had to think to myself, had I been born in Jenin or in Ramallah, and I was 25 or 26 years old, what would I do? And there's no question, if you've actually witnessed the actions of the Israeli government and the Israeli Defense Forces particularly, then there's no question in my mind that Palestinian armed fighters are armed freedom fighters.
Yeah. And why I condemn, it's my stance, I've been against wars all my life, and I don't take sides. It breaks my heart there's so many people dying unnecessarily when it could be solved. And most of it's usually greed for land or natural resources or whatever. And it's just a terrible way to lose human life, I believe. But anyway, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your knowledge. I hope you, the viewers, have enjoyed this as much as I have been educated by these two wonderful men on the position over there in Palestine. And we look forward to your comments. And until we see you again at the weekend, take care now.
Bye now.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.